Thanks for coming on this day filled with environment, which you're wearing right now. I love the title of this exhibition, Glorious Catastrophe, because it could kind of describe just Toronto. This place that is, I think I love Toronto. I've lived here for 25 years and not fallen out of love with it. I'm also so frustrated with it that it's even put me in the emergency room with fast heartbeat sometimes. They took it all too seriously, writing about some issues. So it's like this love stress relationship, which kind of feels like itself sometimes. So the title's like really great about it. And I love the sitting in here kind of surrounded by your work, Gillian, but also it feels like we're kind of in the forest and in nature. And sometimes Toronto actually feels like that. I think Toronto in North American cities, and this is my first question I'm going to ask, what the panelists think about this, but the combination of nature and urbanism is kind of unique to some North American cities, and maybe Canadian cities do this better than maybe American cities. But I've lived in Canada my whole life. It was only when I moved to downtown Toronto that I encountered a beaver, walking in the Don Valley or paddling out to the Toronto Islands in a kayak, or seeing that there's a beaver that looks like an alligator right at the mouth of the Humber River. And I would tell this stuff to my late grandmother. She lived in a fishing village in Nova Scotia that she lived in her whole life, and tell her about these things I was encountering in downtown Toronto, which she thought was all skyscrapers and CN Towers. And she'd be, what? They would kind of like flip her idea of what Toronto is. So I think Toronto has this ability to kind of like, I don't know, undermine the idea of what a city is sometimes, for better or for worse. So maybe that's my question. My opening question. How is Toronto's relationship with the natural environment, whether it's just built or people and nature around it? Like, what's your top level take on that? Feeling good, feeling not good? Jen, maybe.
Okay, well, I've just come from visiting my family on Vancouver Island, so I'm feeling like I've in some ways left nature behind to return to Toronto. But I hear what you're saying, Shawn, and that I've also lived here for just over 20 years. And one of the ways I came to know this city was riding through the ravines and loving that experience of popping up and being completely disoriented when you emerge from various ravine exits. So I think we are especially wrestling with climate change upon us and flood risk and new things we need to consider, perhaps not so new things. Nature is constantly forcing this city and others, I think, to reconcile with a very dynamic and changing force. So I think there's something that we're being increasingly having to be attentive to in city planning and needing to be more attentive to. But I think Torontonians love and value the nature around them, and I see that every day in my walks through the city's ravines and beach spaces. So I'd love to hear what others think.
In terms of what is sort of like,
Do you think like the stuff we built in Toronto, like human creation, the city itself, is complementary of the natural landscape that Toronto's situated in, or we're more in conflict?
more in conflict? I don't know. I guess it depends on sort of like, as well as if you have the time to like utilize natural landscapes as well. I feel like when I'm enjoying city natures, it's often like after work when I'm like, it's like a post dinner walk. So I'm thinking like, who has like the time or like, who has the time to like explore where these as well. But is
Yeah, that's a good point. And sometimes people think Torontonians work too much, but sometimes by necessity, sometimes a place you have to be working in order to afford to live here. But then who gets to have leisure time? And it's just your doctor, you're kind of touching on that kind of conspicuous consumption of leisure activity. And nature is one of them.
Yeah, I haven't. It's interesting. Yeah, to think of nature as like a form of like status expression or something. Um, um, yeah, but I mean, like, I feel like the beach. You were highlighting. Yeah, the beach is like an important destination.
I think it's not just about recreating in these places, though. Nature's all around us, whether we have time to interact with it or not.
I'd actually like to query the binary we're creating here.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little concerned that we're talking as if there's a clear binary between a thing that is nature and then human beings and the things human beings make. Human beings are animals. We are a particular kind of animal, but we are also part of the natural world. And when we create that binary between nature and human and see them as, in many ways, opposed, I've lived here for 42 years, and my main work has been in urban poverty. But one of the problems that's created by that binary is that there could be a greenwashing of anti-poor attitudes. There could be a greenwashing of anti-homeless attitudes. Encampment evictions can be justified by homeless people damaging nature. If you compare the impact of someone living in a tent in the Don Valley or in a park and the proposed expansion of Billy Bishop Airport, I'm really going to query where the priorities lie here. And if you're talking also about who has time to appreciate the Don, the people who live in it, the people who live in that ravine understand that ravine better than any of the residents. The people who live in the parks actually understand the parks better than any of them do. The people who live in the yard of my church understand the rats. Like, I don't have a super good relationship with the rats at my church, but my friend Allison does. And if we're talking about connection with the natural world, these are people who actually have a very profound and very live connection with what we think of as the natural world in a way that most of us don't, from which most of us are alienated. Allison talks about this a lot. She's talked about how, she is privileged in a certain sense to experience the whole question of humans and nature and the relationship between humans and nature and how humans live in nature. I think we have to be very careful of some of the binaries and hierarchies that we create and how they could be socially used.
We'll talk about your encampment specifically, which sort of became the maybe the most prominent one. You're quite busy, and you became the insider. But Jennifer, in your book, Reclaiming the Dawn, you talk about the long history of people living in the Don Valley, like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So like the encampments felt like a new thing during the pandemic.
Encampments have always been in the Dawn. Yeah.
Can you tell us about who lived in the Dawn previous? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to look at in understanding the history of the Don Valley and changes over time was not only changes to the river channel, changes to that environment, but who had experienced this place over time and who had left any records or traces. And, there's a history of using certain parts of the Don, around Riverdale Park and that area. There's a series of 19th century institutions that were built specifically to keep certain populations outside of the view of people living in the center. So everything from isolation hospitals for infectious disease, the Don Jail, located quite near there, prisoner of war camps located for example, where the Tutmore Museum is today. There's a real through line of that kind of place at the edges. The Don was a place at the edge of the 19th century city. It formed the eastern boundaries of Main Street. So when you have this place at the edges, it was not only used for storing hazardous materials, things that might be flammable that would endanger people's homes, for dumping waste you didn't want to look at, but also for storing certain kinds of human populations. So there's that history. But then so that history left a lot of records I could work with. Then there's the history of people living rough in the valley. And that history went back just as far as I could find records. There's references in the very early 1800s to a man who lived in a cave in the embankment at Queen Street in Dawn. And apparently he had a garden and he gathered pitch and other materials. He took his canoe and sold things at the St. Lawrence Market. So he was achieving a level of subsistence, and I think he was apparently a veteran of the Revolutionary War in the U.S. So that's just one story. There's many histories of one of the things is a trial. I won't go on too long because there's so many interesting things to talk about. But there was a politician who was murdered on Queen Street about the middle of the 19th century, and it became a big sensational case. But it also shed light on the people who were accused of his murder, members of what was known as the Brooks Bush Gang. But when you read between the lines of the trial record, you find out that many of these people, a few of them had been injured in agricultural accidents when they were doing labor work outside the city or in, at a time when there was no social safety net at all. So people in those positions who were no longer able to work found themselves sort of in and out of the Don jail and finding shelter in places like the Don Valley. So whether or not this was a large group of people, some members of that group may or may not have been guilty of murdering this MPP, but what was much more interesting, I found, was what we can learn a little bit about their lives and why they had chosen this place. When you compare it to the city grid around it, it provided a degree of refuge, it provided a degree of relief from surveillance. So there's a number of things that the valley provides, and it certainly was viewed, really up until they run the parkway through it in the 1960s, as a place of danger, as a kind of underworld, and this is by residents of the center that way. And of course, I'm casting very wide brushes here, but when you think about the history of the parkway, it was viewed as kind of a civilizing force over an unpredictable place.
When the leaves fall in the fall, in the autumn, it's like this kind of revelation. You go with the green, that, oh wow, well, here all summer long.
Yeah.
Suddenly, yeah, but they're still sort of tucked in away. They're out with the view of the main Toronto. With your church on College Street, it's prominent. Yes, everyone driving by on the streetcar, walking by, civic officials to the city. When did you start feeling like you were the main fighter?
I don't feel I am. I don't like to be positioned as any kind of lead figure in this. I lived and worked alongside the encampment. I cared about people deeply. I worked with people. I don't want to be the star of the story. I am a person with privilege, and I don't want to be the star of this story at the expense of people who have less privilege than I do. So, but I'm not the main fighter. And nobody's, in terms of fighting, I mean, people are just trying to survive. Everyone really regrets that it turned into a fight. No one wanted a fight.
And
we lost.
In this highly ironic moment, he won the Trump Award fall, big thing at the Refinery, and honoring the book, which tells people stories, empathetically. And then the next day, the city arrives with bulldozers and the army and police, and they close the street down, they close the fire hall across it, because it was just a major operation.
Apparently, it cost them $50,000.
which would house somebody.
They keep telling me this because they want me to feel bad about how much money and expense we cause for them. Had trouble, and apparently they felt a lot of emotion about it. And I should feel sorry for them about that.
What is the state of things now? Like, you go by your church.
If you go by my church now, you see that the yard has been surrounded by 8-foot security fences and covered with large concrete blocks, so that it is uninhabitable. It is also unusable as public space. It is no longer green space. The 3 trees there are undoubtedly being harmed by the blocks, although the 3 trees are shaggy old Norway maples, so they're not the greatest trees.
Which violates the city of Toronto tree protection laws.
Yeah.
City of tree protection. I know that I live not too far away from here, Dufferin Road, and we get a big Dufferin Road Park. And the Dufferin Road area is pretty progressive, pretty like lefty, and it's a big listserv that everyone's part of, that Friends of Dufferin Grove, a couple thousand people on it. And I watched through the pandemic that, this neighborhood that has, we love our neighbors and tech sign, front walls, that sort of thing. And I watched the empathy that was always there, never left. But I could tell that after the years went by, like the creation of these downtown lefties, kind of sitting been there and like grumpiness, like, can you do something? Like, some people try to find big solution, like I think useful solutions. Others are like, call the cops. And so just watching it get tested was so like interesting progression. And from your vantage point, you feel like Torontonians, and this is a generalization, but get this bigger picture of why there's this?
No. I mean, I think people understand at a very basic level that people need housing, but they do not have an understanding of how multiple, deeply embedded, complex, interlocking barriers prevent that from happening. Again, I got told our neighbors were running out of patience too. It's like, okay, we're all running out of patience, but there's people here who've been on the waiting list for housing for over 15 years. For sure they're running out of patience. There's people here who've been homeless for 20 years, 30 years. I'm sure they're finding that their patience is being tried by that too. The system is built, and it's built in a really complex way that walks in all the different levels of government to make it extraordinarily hard for anyone to find housing or even frequently appropriate shelter. And people don't know that. Now, there's no reason they should know that. They are prevented from knowing that by the kind of rhetoric that governments use and which the media uncritically repeats. You have to actually live alongside people who are trying to survive in this situation to have any sense of how multiple and complex and impenetrable these barriers are. So, in a way, I don't blame people for feeling impatient, but they feel impatient because they do not understand, and they do not understand because governments and a fairly compliant media have prevented them from understanding. And that's really probably the main reason I wrote the book.
One of the things we're talking about today, or we will talk about it later, is the idea of third spaces. And a third space is a place that's neither work nor home, a place to hang out. Sometimes it's a coffee shop, sometimes it's a free space, a park, that sort of thing. As I walked here, the rain, I walked down Ossington, which is like third space central, the bars and cafes, and people lining up in the rain for something new. I don't know what it was. And this is what your doctoral research is on with the Ossington Park. I think of Ossington as being like the fastest gentrification I've ever seen. Like it went from auto body shops and places you get your winter tires rotated or whatever to like absurd stuff. Like I think it's fair to say the speed of that. Stevie.
Yeah, I think it had to do a lot as well. Like my research was a sort of this was my previous graduate work. I looked at the gentrification of the street through the lens of ice cream commerce. Yeah, there was even the ice cream space itself used to be a Portuguese mechanic shop that was then dissected into a restaurant and the ice cream boutique. I think you also have to look at the structural transformation of Camp Age as well. That played a big role in sort of like turning the reputation over of this sort of like Ossington being this like space of danger that sort of like propelled capital investment and attracted sort of like very like demonized media narratives. And once Camp H was transformed, that created a new opportunity for capital investment and cultural entrepreneurs to flood into the street because there was like a spatial stigma that was.
They even changed the address from 999 to 1001.
Yes, so there were all these symbolic changes that were distancing Ossington from this sort of like spatial marginality of that it used to sort of like hold on to. And this was also sort of like driven by the media as well. Like the Globe and Mail would sort of write about how people, how sort of like persons with complex mental illness are no longer sort of like present on Ossington. They're sort of just a part of the scene. So there's sort of like there's like a camouflaging of mental illness now. It's not sort of like a deterrent to being on the street. So I think Camp H is sort of important for accelerating this change on the street.
That was one of the intersections Ossington with me where I would just kind of look up and not know where it was, like the transformation was so radical. Like the south side would be building where there was big space. That was part of it, but that just
Yes, and even the sense of danger now has sort of been aestheticized. So like the graffiti and like the sense of urban grit that is on Ossington that used to symbolize fear and sort of danger has now sort of like this is a sign of sort of like gritty authenticity that's sort of like in the background of ice cream Instagram posts.
Yeah.
So there's like a trace of urban danger that is that sort of like come under the gaze of investment.
And I was going to talk about influencers. You write about them as well, and their effect on a place like Ossington. How do an Ossington influencer syndrome? So you're not getting pop-ups designed just to like get influencers. And so, like, what is the effect that you try to lens or force?
Ossington, I feel like is sort of like it's like it's like sort of like an Instagram neighborhood in particular, in terms of like the aesthetics of the street.
Yeah, there's murals I see people. There's that one mural on the east side.
Yes.
Is it beautiful?
Yeah, I think it's like Act Beautifully or something. Yes. Yeah. Yes. But there, I feel like the aesthetics are even more like subtle, like sort of like in terms of like restaurants. They don't necessarily like signal you to post on Instagram, but because they're so curated, they're very tempting to post. Yeah.
You're thinking about influencers on Ossington walking through King. Certainly, I'm thinking about the kind of other side of influencing in Toronto. Anyway, there's these Instagram accounts that they're on other platforms too that just sort of exploit the bad thing, like the negative side of it. One of them is Integrity TO, and he has a new friends who follow him on Instagram. He makes these videos that are all raw. Now he's using AI and faking it. It's going to be a bad election. But he often focuses on people with distress and in Canada. You probably work with some of that groups. Like you have these forces of aestheticization of a place like Ossington, the same thing, but exploiting, the
Well, and Brad Bradford's first election ad has all these pictures of unhoused people just going about their daily life. And like, Toronto has never been so unsafe. Homeless people are existing. I don't know.
And I'm just wondering, like, what the general media literacy? I have my own feeling about that. Probably a little cynical. Like, do people see influencers and see the artifice of it? Do people see integrity of see it as a very big thing? And that's why I think this year can be very interesting to see if that kind of thing has an effect. But he made a video, not that we made a video about me a month ago because I was critical of Olivia Chow and not critical of F. And I mentioned rage bait internet accounts, not being my name. And he made a video, who is Shawn Micallef? I had to lock down all my social media accounts. This wave of see what it does? This wave of that crap, it's actually hot for a while. And so to be an actual politician, to be anyone that tries to do anything, a public figure, just like, it is smart. What is my question at that? Yeah, how do you, like, is there a way around this? Like, what is is there like authenticity? Say about
Do we avoid?
Well, I actually think it's only going to get like worse because it is like, the Toronto Public Library just held their first innovative residence that was digital influencer. So there's like a recognition that content creation is a legitimate job, and content creators will use the city as like a source of images. So this the city is vital to content production. It's a content farm in some ways. Yeah, we actually don't. That's sort of like what I'm trying to like research. There's no research on urban influencers. So, but I think that it's as people are sort of aspiring to like the status of being an influencer, whether that's like a food influencer, fashion, fitness, family, or finance. Like these are very like creative forms of employment because they have control for their schedules. They get to sort of like use their creativity in some ways. So it's sort of like not going anywhere. I for now consider that.
I have actually, maybe I'm jinxing myself by saying this, but I've had very little of the social media storm around me. The hostility I've had, and it has been real, has been primarily face-to-face or on email. And I'm not sure why, but I do live a slightly pre-industrial sort of life. I mean, I'm on social media, but I'm not on very much. I'm very subdued in all my social media presence. And I'm a priest, and I have a church, and it's this old red brick old church, and I put on vestments, and I preach, and I lead services, and I talk to people on the street, and I stay in my own community, and very rarely go outside my own community. And there's really not much people can hang on to there. Kareem Assad once came to my church to try to build something that she could use to smear me with. And like, she just totally came up dry. She's like, well, she's up there wearing vestments and talking about the Bible, I guess.
Well, man is attacking both now.
Yeah. I want to stress that this is not a golden calf. But yeah, no. But I mean, I think the Pope is kind of bulletproof on a very large scale in the same way that I'm a bit bulletproof on a small scale. We're just doing our thing. And our thing is very old. It's really old, and it's really hard to touch us. And the Pope is just like, I mean, I'm sorry if you have a problem with the gospel of Jesus Christ, Donald Trump. You're just going to have to deal with that.
The ravine system with Toronto, it's old, the islands are old. our parks are a bit newer, but we have a pretty good park system. It's called a beat system. And look at the amount of hectares, per person. But I think, I didn't put this teacher for. Do you think we've sort of taken it for granted and not done a good enough job? Toronto's not done a good enough job. Not just making parks as third states case. And a little one thing is like the public washer issue of it, and how impossible it is to go to a washer.
Yeah. I think there's an older idea of, 19th century idea, probably older than park creation, which is you establish a boundary and then you're done. And I think we're finding with our poly crises, or however whatever word we want to use to describe the moment we're in, that is not only insufficient but harmful. And I think when we think about the traditional national parks outside the city, and the exclusions that were part of those parks creation, there's been a lot of history that's been written about those exclusions, which is quite interesting because, as Maggie was saying earlier, there's this fiction of there's this need to create this sense of these are spaces without people for people somewhere else to come and enjoy. And I think when we think about urban parks, there's been a similar thing at work of we protected it, we preserved it. But like our national parks, we can't step away. We need to maintain these spaces. And I think some of the most exciting work that's happening in Canada right now is the collaboration with Indigenous groups around the country to try to reopen park spaces as places where people might still hunt, might still fish, might still gather, and steward. And I think we can apply some of that thinking to our urban parks as well, because they need stewardship, whether that's recognizing that places where you invite people to come and hang out require washrooms as a basic need year-round. And I think, of course, that's an expense for the city in there. But there's such great examples elsewhere of cities who've done this so well. So that's one thing. But then I think when we think about the changes in our ravines, I'm thinking more on the environmental side of things. If there's a species people might think of, or why are we so needing to pull up invasive species? Is there a xenophobia there? And perhaps in some of the thematic aspect of it, maybe there is. But I think it's recognizing that there are millennia of coevolution between plants and insects that support our entire ecosystems and chains. And invasive plants that often create toxic conditions for other plants to grow, and that shade out native plants. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. But anyway, this is another area of stewardship where what's been really exciting, I think, is where we're not seeing the city so much having the time and resources to steward our parks. We are seeing citizen associations go in and clean up garbage in parks, much of which has blown from open dumpsters behind apartment bins rather than people dumping it necessarily, right? Going in and caring for the parks in our backyards. And I've been really excited to see that, and I think we're seeing more. Yeah. Toronto Nature Stewards, Don't Mess with the Dawn, all these organizations that are also recognizing that bringing people into these places will cultivate a sense of love and protection for them. And I think that, there's an interesting dynamic at work right now. People are feeling helpless to confront some of the bigger crises around us and turn them to their very local environments close to home. And I'm sure Maggie has something to say about it. I know some of those same groups are quite critical of encampments in the valley. And so there's a tension there.
There is. I would really love to see a situation where we could have a decent conversation about coexistence. about coexistence and compromise and how we, like, these have never been uninhabited spaces. And that's one of the valuable things about your research. These have never been uninhabited spaces. They were not uninhabited pre-colonial. They've never been uninhabited. So how do we manage the inevitable human habitation of these spaces alongside everything else about them? How do we manage parks so that if people have nowhere else to go, they can in fact put up a tent in a park, and the park can still be available to families, to people wandering around, to what the park can be available to a multitude of uses, which would include habitation. It gets posed as if there is one homeless person in the park, all the children must run away forever. And that kind of demonization of unhoused people that makes it sound as if, you know, if an unhoused person is in a park, all other park users are excluded because of the incredible danger posed by an unhoused person. I've never been able to have that conversation in a constructive way, and I would love to have that conversation. You know, what do we need to do to talk about coexistence and how all the different users of our city can actually constructively coexist? It would be a great conversation. No one wants to have it.
I have one more thought, but you probably have questions, so have those in your head. I'll put those there. This is an interesting place to talk about all of this. You know, this is the third phase, not the people who work here. You're close enough to my hand here. You come in and look at things for free. Some of them we are big for here, but we're 2 blocks Mossington and all that's going on there. 2 blocks Trinity Bell is, and it is like good that they pull up the pandemic. It's that you sort of being art is an essential part of the city, not just this like add-on, because there's so many people that live in apartment buildings in Toronto. It's this city that's historically ruled by people with backyards, that suddenly the parks became a vital place to go. And looking at Trinity Sellers, I think the sun's going to come out late today. Walk over there, it'll just be this like hell of people with tall hands here or else. And that sort of evolved into like sort of being somewhat acceptable. And it's interesting to see how that's treated versus
yeah, and I would point out that a lot of that evolution into a park that was full of people all the time happened while there were 2 significant encampments in that park. It did not exclude all the other users of that park. All the other users of that park came and used the park in all kinds of ways, and there were 2 fairly substantial encampments. There was that coexistence for a while.
Bryan, so if there's not that hard, so privacy.
Yeah, people will take their ice cream, I guess, and if it won't melt by the time they get to Trader Joe's. Yeah, I love how you were saying there was this encampment in Trinity Bell, and then there was that eviction that happened, and then the park was sort of secured through those like circles for leisure. So, and the people playing the whole trampoline game.
Everyone made fun of those circles, chalk circles that, you know, your social distance circles.
Yeah.
At the end of that summer, they were born at like Toronto to be.
They all make containment.
Some of
I mean, Trinity Bell's that park really knits together sort of like the gentrification of like multiple neighborhoods. That's the sort of like that is like the sort of like the neighborhood park for so many different uses now. And I mean, it's always sort of been like a site of like alcohol consumption, but now it's just legalized. So
I'm gonna go back to my hobby horse just for a minute, and also point out that the city has clearly, in a number of cases, in almost every case, for at least for short periods of time, sometimes for long periods of time, prioritize keeping out homeless people over letting anyone else use parks. Parts of Trinity Bellwood were fenced for quite a while. Parts of Alexandra Park, most of Alexandra Park was fenced for quite a while. Sonia's Park in the market has now been fenced for 4 years. That park has been unusable by any human being for 4 years. And there appears to be no plan ever to open it up again because the priority is to prevent unhoused people from being in it. And if in order to do that, you have to prevent all people from being in it, so be it. This appears to be the sensibility of the city of Toronto about parks.
That's a little forget.
Yeah. People really miss Sonia's. I mean, it was little, but it was a significant part of the community. And people talk about Sonia's. And people wonder, will Sonia's ever be opened up again?
Those 3 little parks along the street just were that are over the subway were issued for 4 years. Part of it they said was redoing. There was they did redo them, but they just the fences lingered forever. Never really to Bryan and Maggie and all you for coming and for Kaufman for having this conversation.